Well, I have to say to you, when I said to my colleagues that I would like to celebrate my teaching career, I thought there'd be about 30 people here, the staff members from Lavington Public School, and I thought some of my closer members of my family might be here, and I'd like to thank every single person who is here. Thank you very much for being with me to celebrate what I think is the most important, or one of the most important things you can do in life. I decided I wanted to celebrate teaching because it was so important to me, but because I also think of it as a profession that can give so much to other people. I think that throughout our lives, all of us are teachers and all of us are learners. And I'm actually going to talk to you tonight more about me as a learner rather than as a teacher. And I'm afraid I know Rick and Helen have given you a little summary of my life, but I'm actually going to go through it so I can tell you about my own learning experiences as a teacher. I actually started when I was 4, when I begged to go to school. And I don't know why it wasn't Brian Bynum, Vic Colbert's left me into school, but I have a feeling it was because that he thought that I was a bad influence on his 3-year-old daughter. Or it could have been because I was actually at that stage spending my days sitting on a tree outside the window looking into the one-teacher Garrett classroom and trying to get in there. So he finally let me in when I was 4. And there's actually somebody here who was in kindergarten with me. And it's Noel Burgess. Noel Burgess, I'd actually like you to stand, please. And there are quite a few other people here from Garrett School. If you can remember back, Noel, we were in a play in kindergarten, and it was called The Little Red Hen. And I had a bit more hair then, and I was the little red hen, but I can't remember what you were. I remember that Errol, your brother, was the rat. Trevor was the rat. But I can't remember what you were. Anyway, it started, I always loved drama right from that minute. And I guess that when you're learning yourself, that's where that all of us learn how to be teachers, from the role models and the things that happen to us. And I actually went to, as I said, the one teacher school, about 24 children, down to about 16 when I was there. And two really important things happened. One was, I had a teacher who actually loved drama, and I was able to do drama every year. The second thing was, he was an excellent role model as a teacher, Brian Bynum. And he did quite innovative things in all sorts of areas. I mean, peer support started years ago. We aren't just doing it in our generation. I remember many times sitting with younger students and reading with them and doing all sorts of things with them. And I started really loving school right from that moment. I really always loved primary school, and it was really exciting for me, and I was successful at it. I then went on to Moulamein Central School. There was also some people here who went to me at Moulamein Central School, and some who went to Manildra Central School had come over for cooking and industrial arts. Some of them were quite good looking too. We used to chase those boys. Didn't we, Bill? I was lucky enough when I was at Moulamein, I had an absolutely outstanding teacher, and I'd actually really like to get in contact with her, and I think I know how I can do it. Her name was Dorothy Campbell, and more than any other person, she brought out an absolute love in literature for me. And as a role model, as a teacher, of someone who could empathise with children, who could enthuse me to make a fool of myself in plays and read and to do wonderful things, she was just absolutely outstanding. Anyway, then I went in year 11 and 12 to Orange High, and I actually found out what there is to dislike about school. And I actually loathed year 11 and 12. I went there purely to get a HSC. I think from my experiences that I had then, I'm not sure that high schools have changed that much since. I guess they have. They haven't, as far as I'm concerned, changed enough to meet the needs of 17 and 18-year-olds. And I just managed to get through those 2 years. I don't really think it's appropriate to put 17 and 18-year-olds in uniforms and expect them to do what we expect 13 and 14-year-olds to do. And I remember my own experiences being extremely unhappy during that time. At the end of it, Mum was actually away in England, and I my father and I were at home, and I got my HSC, and I got a Commonwealth scholarship to go and do pure maths. At Sydney and New South Wales University, you know, I couldn't actually decide what to do. I just wanted to go to Europe and write poetry. So when I suggested that to Daddy, wasn't really that impressed. So he said, look, why don't you go to Teachers College? He said, it'll be just a real bludge. You can have a really good time. So go up to Bathurst, you'll still be like reading it close to home. If you don't like teaching, I'll pay off your bond. So I had a bit of think about this and I thought, oh, all right, I'll go to Teachers College. It might be a bit of a laugh and it shouldn't be too hard. I won't have to do much work and I'm sick of that. It should be a bit of a laugh. So off I went to Teachers College and my father bought me this dress. Pretty amazing, I squeezed into it again. Anyway, Teachers College was really great. You didn't have to wear uniform. You had to have a really, really good time. After the first year, you were allowed in boys' rooms, and I met Dennis. I started actually teaching at a central school. I'm a great believer in central schools and giving children the opportunity to be leaders at different ages in their lives, and also working with different aged children. And it was really amazing. Within a couple of months I knew I was actually going to like this job. You know, it was like totally amazing to me that I would like actually doing what I was doing. And I worked with some wonderful people at Tullamore, and I think they persuaded me more than anyone else. And I again saw these marvellous role models as teachers. I've seen them all my life. I've worked with the most wonderful and amazing people, and they've taught me so much about teaching. When I was at Tullamore, we actually had reading groups, and I took this reading group which was sort of about round lower second grade standard, and we had children in it from first grade to sixth grade. And I had a sixth grade children's class, and I taught him to read. I actually taught him to read from being of a reading age around 6.5, 7 to actually up to about 12 or 13, and I don't think I actually then knew what the joy of teaching was going to be about. It was a really profound experience to know that you'd taught a child to read. And so I thought, shit, this is going to be a good profession to be in. I think I can handle this. You know, this has got some real peaks in it. Oh, that's right. Wendy, where is she? I am actually not going to say that word, Wendy. I promise you. I might say some other ones. Where is she? Anyway, I guess the thing about when you first get out teaching, there is so much you have to learn to do. And I always really loved all the creative side, but I had to actually find out all this stuff about, like, you know, teaching them reading and maths and all that sort of stuff. And in those days, you used to get inspected by inspectors. Right? Any inspectors in the room? And they used to actually do a full inspection, and they actually were doing a full inspection of the school, but they were also inspecting me because I had to go for my teacher's certificate. I had to be inspected by an inspector. And it was 4 days long. Monday morning came, every lesson. Oh, it was superb! Every lesson was brilliant. He didn't know. And the kids were so good. One afternoon, we were creative, we were wonderful. Tuesday the same, Wednesday the same, and my children were being so wonderful. They were perfect. Thursday the same. By Thursday afternoon, I was exhausted. Still nothing. So we'll have a little free afternoon, he's not coming. Never did make the big decisions right. We had free time. I only had 45, we had about 43 students in small rooms, but we had a lovely free afternoon, and of course the inspector did come in. And on my first ever teaching report, it says I'm wonderfully creative. I won't go into the other parts of it. I also learned that you had to look at each individual child and meet their needs. And I taught a child in Tullamore, his name was Wayne, that would do anyway. And Wayne I had a fourth class, and he was about 9 or 10, he was a little bit old, he couldn't read. And he used to come into school and he was really exhausted, and he was absolutely filthy, and he was also really used to misbehave a fair amount. And I talked to him one day. He told me that he did the night shift on the tractor, and Dad did the day shift, and they worked on a very, very poor farm. And I worked out the best thing I could do with him was take him down to where I boarded, where I lived with a couple of elderly people who'd been farmers, and get him a shower and put him to bed. That's actually how I taught that child for 2 or 3 months of the year. And I worked out you really had to look at kids' individual needs. And I didn't really think it was a lot of point me teaching to read. It was a lot better than if he got a bit of sleep and cleaned himself up and got a good feed. And I'm afraid that's been my philosophy of working out what the most important needs were ever since. I left Tullamore, not too many regrets. It wasn't exactly the most exciting town you've ever lived in. And Dennis didn't like it much because I had Rish's beer at that stage. And there wasn't a place for him there, so we moved to, well, we got married and we moved to Moulamein, where we actually had a lot of fun. And it was right at the time, Whitlam had just got into government, and there were resources everywhere. And it was just so exciting to be actually able to buy the resources and have the things that you needed in the classroom and have an extra special reading teacher. I taught with a really outstanding teacher called Shez Robins, who I actually didn't invite tonight, so I don't know where she is, but anyway, we did a lot of experimenting in new things. It was in that era where Steiner and Piaget and those people reading, and we had a lot of freedom in our classroom and a lot of fun. Do you remember Trevor Green, Dennis? Dennis used to work with us. We had 3 teachers and 70 students in this very, very large double classroom. We had one very recalcitrant student who, his mother actually used to tie him up to a tree when she went out because that seemed to be the best way to handle him. But he loved Dennis. Every time Dennis ever got down on the floor to play with these infants kids, he would jump on his back. And he was actually about the size of Matthew here. Dennis used to go, we spent that actual year trying to stop Trevor jumping on Dennis. Apart from that, I guess a lot of my ideas about student-based learning and students actually enjoying what they were doing and enjoying the learning process came into being during that time. At the end of 2.5 years at Moulamein, Dennis and I went overseas. And we worked at a lot of different jobs. And in fact, I got the sack from a job, the only job I've ever got the sack from, in London. I worked at a school teaching foreigners to speak English, and I got the new class. And it was mostly, in fact 25 students, and they were adults obviously. They were mostly men, and they were mostly from Arabic type countries. And I was a fairly young girl at this stage, and I actually had a very hard time teaching these young fellows. And I was pretty well looking out after myself and for my own protection, and I went in on the first day, and I said, well, what do you do? How do you do this? And they said, look, you just got a textbook. And he said, you just work through the textbook for 3 hours? I said, yeah, look, if you make it boring enough, they drop down. It doesn't matter. They've all paid their fees. And so, you get a smaller class. So I went in with the textbook. After about half an hour, I was running out of things to do. We got through about 4 pages, hadn't understood anything, they didn't know. And I said, this bloke next door said, oh, don't worry about meaning. You just teach them the words. Oh, okay, so I went teaching away. Well, the biggest problem was they kept getting closer and closer and closer to me. And I was feeling fairly threatened by this stage. I'm sitting in this little corner. Oh, God, what can I do, to get out of this? So I jumped up and I said, now we're going to do some practical stuff today. They're all adults, so out we went. So I used to take them off out to the park and teach them the names of tree and bench and buy a railway ticket and go to a chemist shop or do whatever I liked. And the principal actually gave me the sack. I had a lot of fun doing that job. I think I lasted about 3 weeks in it. One of the interesting things about going overseas was actually being in countries and being in a minority. And I'd never experienced being in a picture theatre and being the only 2 white people in it, or being out. And it had, I think, a profound effect on my realisation of what it was like for other cultures, and it certainly affected my work when I came back to Australia. And I really enjoyed, the other thing I really enjoyed about it was doing, as I said, different jobs, working in pubs, because Dennis and I actually had a most wonderful time overseas. We also had a wonderful time travelling around, but I really enjoyed working in pubs. It was nearly as good as teaching. And you got free drinks. When I got to Bourke and I came back, I started actually working with teenagers. It would be an area that I'd really like to go back into. I really liked working with adolescents, and I worked with, there was always more than one way to skin a cat. And you know what that expression means? It's a bit of an out-back Bourke expression, but you could always get round children in some way. No, I won't tell that story, I will go all night and run out of energy. The major influence in Bourke, of course, was having Ben and Rowena. And when I went to Bourke, it was the first time I actually met Aboriginal people in Australia, which is a pretty amazing thing when I've lived in Australia all my life and when I got there. And I'd only been in Bourke about 2 days, and I was working at a hostel for, can anyone hear me? Good job, I've got a big voice. And I worked at this hostel with secondary students, and they came from all sorts of areas out in the bush, and came and lived in the hostel during the week. Some of them had to stay weekends as well. And one of the parents brought their children in on a Monday morning and welcomed me. They were really friendly, lovely people, graziers from out loud somewhere. And they said to me, "Is your husband a shooter?" And I was trying to be, you know, friendly, very nice, welcoming parent. And I said, oh yes, I think he's, you know, yes, yes, I'm sure he can go out and shoot a few rabbits. Or said, "Oh, look, we've got pigs on our place, feral pigs." He said, "Come out any time you want to," he said, "and shoot pigs." Oh, thank you very much. That would be very nice. And then he said, "Oh, before he comes out, they make sure he shoots all the black pigs in town." I said, "Oh, I had no idea what he's talking about." And I thought, oh my God, I think he's talking about people. And it really set me back on my heels. And that comment made me think about the whole issue of Aboriginal people. And I think I still would have always been interested in Aboriginal education, but that negative comment made me, become, I think, how involved I was in Aboriginal education. I'm sorry to tell that story if it upset you, and it isn't meant to upset at all. There are plenty of people, we all know that in the world, and it really made me key in that terrible negative comment. It was very interesting because I actually had a really good time in Bourke and I met some wonderful people. There are actually a couple of people that I didn't talk with that I knew in Bourke, and I think they should stand up. Those 2 people that I worked with in Bourke, please stand up. Come on, Mrs. Turner. Mrs. Turner. And of course the other major influences I said was having Ben and Rowena. And when you watch children grow, there is just so many things you learn. I really wish that I'd written down how they learned how to speak. Because both Ben and Rowena learned how to speak in totally different ways. Ben, who's always been pretty particular about what he does, learned how to speak in a really, really set way. He did proper nouns first, then he did nouns, then he did adjectives, then he did verbs. That's how he learned to speak. That is honestly how he learned to speak. He did all of it in his very, very set way at a very, very early age. He started speaking very young. Now, Rowena didn't speak at all. And in fact, she used to always look like she was speaking to Ben, but I've never kept her speaking. And she got to about 16 months, and I thought, oh, this girl doesn't know how to very good. She talked very much, but by 16 months, Ben was starting to talk in sentences. Suddenly one day, I sent her the letter, and she started speaking in perfect sentences. And she'd been talking to Ben all the time, and got him doing the talking, and she'd learned in this totally different way, which of course is what all teachers know that every student in our class does. They all do it differently, and we have to cater for it. When we were in Bourke, Dennis is actually an itinerant teacher. He worked with children who were on either school or the year of correspondence at the time. We'd met wonderful people out in the bush, and we decided that we'd apply for Wanaaring. I think we were the first people in history ever to apply for Wanaaring Public School, and they gave it to us. We worked under a really remarkable inspector, who's in Dubbo, called Cleet O'Connor. And Cleet O'Connor, I remember him giving a talk in Bourke at a cluster meeting, and he actually taught me that our clients were the children. They weren't the parents, they weren't other teachers, they weren't anybody who was trying to tell you what to do in the department, or anyone that was trying to tell you what to do in local government or the town or anything else. Who we actually work for, who are the important people, were the children, and they had to come first. And that's always been my philosophy in education, and I think that Cleet O'Connor did me a great service at one stage, really laying that on the line. And I think that I would lay that on the line to anyone I work with. That the people that you really are working for are the actual children. They're your clients. I found out that children needed to have security and boundaries, because there's only Dennis and I out there, and Wendy Lindsay, of course, and that they needed to have set guidelines. We had this little kid that came out, and I'll call him by his right name. He was called Dax. Wendy still looks after him. Ain't you, Wendy? Still live at your place? And Dax didn't seem to have a lot of security in his life, or a lot of protection, or a lot of care. And he came to school, and he was a bit wild. He didn't think he'd been very often to school. And he went for a couple of days, and I think he got a bit tired of it, so he decided to go off down the river. So Dennis said to me, "You look after the kids, I'll go and get him." "Come on, Robert," it's Wendy's son. He said, "Show me where you reckon he'll be." And off they went down and picked him up. Dad was pretty amazed by this. And he had to start coming to school after that, because he actually knew somebody cared enough about him to make him come. And he knew that there were actually going to be some boundaries that were very safe for him. Something that I learned Wanaaring was that you could actually learn heaps from the children that you taught, and that every child, didn't matter what else they could do, every single child you taught had wonderful skills, had wonderful experiences, had wonderful expertise. When, at Wanaaring, a child was lost in the town, Wendy's son Robert and her nephew Randall were the first people that were called to actually go to look for that lost child, and he was found fairly quickly as a 2-year-old that was lost along the river. And their bush skills were so outstanding, and they were teaching them to us, and they were using them in their lives. And that is the case with every child that I've ever taught, that they have had wonderful skills and knowledges and things that everyone, that each one of them had is special to them. In Wanaaring, one of our aims in going to Wanaaring was to see how a school, if a school could be the centre of the community. And even though I don't think it ever can really compete with that other love of my life, pubs, Wanaaring School, we did make an attempt at working within that community, working with children from correspondence school here, having a preschool, and I'll never forget our knit days. Do you remember our knit days? And what we used to do is that we used to knit every child in school, because I've got one knit, everyone's got one, right? And anyone here not know what knits are? if so, you lie. Anyway, anyone who came to help, anyone who came in, had to be knitted as well. That was the rule. So we used to try to get as many people as we could in, because then you could actually get rid of them for the whole community. Anyway, when we were at Wanaaring, Princess Di got married. And we actually had this big coup. We got the video out the next day, and it was the biggest knitting day we'd ever had. Like, every single person in Wanaaring came, and we got rid of headlights for a long time that time. We decided, Dennis and I, that we'd go inside after Wanaaring, and we both were appointed to the Mudgee area, Mudgee area, and we actually lasted 6 months. And we bought a house and went straight back out after 6 months to Wilcannia. And I actually really liked Lavington Valley, but Dennis wasn't so keen, and he managed to convince me to put him for the executive teacher position at Wilcannia. And Wilcannia, I think, has had the deepest effect on my life. And I will promise the Wilcannia people that I will come out there very soon as I can. So actually really, my major aim this year is to get back to Wilcannia for a period of time. I guess I learned humility and compassion at Wilcannia, and at Wilcannia we lost students. Students actually died at our school, and parents died at our school, and a lot of people died, children who were too young. And it's the hardest 4 years of my life, and it was the happiest 4 years of my life. Oh shit, I don't want to cry. I won't tell you about it, that part. Yeah, and it really, I think all teachers should have the experience. I wish we were like Queensland and New South Wales and make every teacher have country experience. I learned so much about teaching at Wilcannia. I learned so much about life at Wilcannia. I learned success works and failure doesn't. And that if you, I'm looking at you, Stephen Buckley, you taught me a lot of this, that wonderful positive attitude of yours, that when you work with children, that if you could find those successes for the road runners or the Eagles, remember there's a photo up there of the Eagles, God, we had a lot of successes. I taught them how to use the phone. Anyway, I thought about this. I had a reading group of 13 children who couldn't read. They were about 4th or 5th class level. We had some wild times in that room, I can tell you. I used to get them in most, I had to cook them meals to get them to come to school. And I taught them how to use the telephone. And unfortunately, I had a child who was actually OA in this room, and he said to me, "What's your telephone number?" So I just told him straight back because he'd asked me for it. I never actually thought that he'd remember it, and he did, and he wrote it in the phone box up at the Mallee. And I got a lot of phone calls. But I actually paid a child $1 to go and rub it out. Success works. I worked with one of the most wonderful staff. First year out to a man, if they weren't first year out, they were second or third year out. And I would like that staff of Wilcannia Central School to stand up, and there are 4 of them here. I think there may be more. Dennis, 5. So Diane and Jeff, Claire, Steve, Jenny. I dipped my lid to you. Jeff Kelly, you are the most amazing art teacher I've ever seen, and if you know and I know success works. I've got a lot of Jeff's paintings at home, but Jeff was able to, and Claire and Diane and everyone I thought at Wilcannia, with your enthusiasm, working with the things that you knew about, were able to allow children to succeed and allow children to be as they are. And it was wonderful working with young people again who had the ability to get to that level of children. And it's been always one of the hard things to do, is to be on the level. And I think actually that some of us are getting a bit old for it, and we're really having to work hard to work with a generation that's possibly even 2 below our own. When I was at Wilcannia, I was a child, and I actually invited her, and she's really upset that she wasn't able to come, and her name was Samantha Mudgee. Samantha and I had a few run-ins in our time, and she's the most dear girl, and I can assure you that she did actually have a fairly good temper on her. And one day she had a really enormous tantrum, and she kicked me fairly hard to the floor, and she called me the best string of swear words I've ever heard in my life. She strung them together like you'd never believe. I never ever told anyone what she said because it was such a good string, I reckon they'd use it forever after. And she really, really went off, and as she was on the floor kicking and swearing, and she called me white, and it really hurt me. Actually, the swear words didn't matter so much, but she actually called me white, and I just went down and I went smack on her thigh. And then I thought about her mother. And I went over to Steve, and picked her up. She actually stopped screaming and kicking me. And I said, "Right, we better go and see Mr. Buckley." And I went over and I said to Steve, "I've hit her." And he said, "You can go and explain it to Margaret." And I did. "Come on, Samantha," in the car. Off we went, and I did explain it, and I did apologise to her mother, and the only child I've ever hit, and I learned no violence, ever. Because the person that it affected most was me. And I'm glad to say that Samantha and I have remained friends throughout these years, and it was a really, that stage I knew I'd never ever had, well I had actually, because in the schools when we worked, the cane was in, and there was violence practised, not just the cane, and it really did teach me that no. There was no bottom line. There are some things in teaching that there is no bottom line about. One's racism and one's violence. I guess too at Wilcannia I realised the importance of bonding with students, and it was really interesting to go to the lecture at the beginning of term 2 this year of Charles Bourke and listen to his thoughts on bonding with students and how teacher-student bonding possibly is one of the most important things in actual teaching children. And I think I may have realised it before, but it became very important in teaching Aboriginal students, and it just didn't work unless you did bond with the child and unless you were honest and you did genuinely like the children. And Wilcannia, you couldn't get anywhere without parental support. Some people even taught me how to fish. And if you ask Suzanne Hall, she might even tell you about my first ever fishing experience. You want to come up and tell us, Suzanne? Go on. Come up and tell us. My first few months in Wilcannia, there actually was a segregated staff room. There was an Aboriginal staff room and a white staff room, and I used to actually go to the Aboriginal staff room. Suzanne and I were talking about that this morning, and she came out for breakfast. I'll give you tell about fishing later. Okay. Then I moved to Lavington, and I guess it was a time of consolidation, of putting everything into practice and of spending some time on my farm and with my family. Actually, a really funny thing when I came to Lavington, I really wanted to tell this to Mike Waters, and I've never actually told him, so I'll tell him now. It's confession time. I was sitting in the staff room one day with Jenny Dees, and Jenny Dees was working out that she was the least experienced member on staff in years of teaching, permanent teaching department. She's sitting there counting up, she said, you know, this is a really experienced school. She said, everyone here has been teaching years, all the permanent teachers. She said, I have been teaching for 13 years, and she said, I'm the least experienced member of staff here. You know, I came to Lavington as the AP, and she was wrong. She wasn't the least experienced member of staff. I'd actually only been out permanent teaching for the Department of Education for 12, but I was never ever came to tell anyone. I looked at the experience of the staff and I learned from them. They were the most amazing bunch of teachers. Again, teachers are wonderful people, and we should all remember that. We do. We're obviously here to celebrate that wonderful profession. And I learnt so much from people like Elaine Thompson. I learnt so much from people like Max Apps. Now, I don't think I'll ever be a softball coach. I learnt a lot from every member of staff. Jan Sutherland, I learnt so much from you, thank you. And working with that sort of level of experience after working with one or two teachers, that was just, and the sort of children here was just like this major change. It was like a totally different profession. I remember the first few weeks, role of AP, go out in the playground, look for the problems. That's what I thought APs did. So I walk out in the playground, you know, immediately looking for where the fight was. There wasn't one. Funny time. So it was a time for me to hone my skills, and it was a time for me where I actually had time to work with that love of my life, drama. And I had such a lot of fun. I put on 4 productions on this stage, with not all of them with every child in the school, but nearly, and I had a lot of fun. And I was able to look at the changes that were happening in the department and choose the ones that were right, the ones that worked for me, and having the confidence to do that, and rejecting the ones that didn't. I like the mission statement of Lavington Public School. It's in the best interests of the child, and that's what it's all about. I'm just going to talk briefly about now, because I'm still learning. And I now have to make probably the most major changes that I'm ever going to make in my life. I'm going to put that energy that I've put into children and teaching in myself, which I've never been able to do, and I'm going to make them life choices based on my needs. And it's very hard for me to do that. It's very, very hard for me to give up teaching. But I'm really looking forward to the future, and I'm living life for every bloody moment of it. I'd like to thank every student I've ever taught, and there are a lot of them here. There aren't many because they're too young at Lavington. And students at that age want to go out and party instead of coming to some old fuddy-duddies thing. But if I've taught you, Danny Polkinghorne and Peter Bridgman and Ben Charnley and anyone else here, I'd actually like you to come up and join with me now, please. Is there anyone here that I've taught? And Rowena Charnley? I taught you all the speech. I especially want to thank all my colleagues. Every colleague I have ever worked with, I want to thank. I've had such a lot of fun with you all, and I'm still going to be around, and I still want to see heaps of you, especially all you Lavington lot. People from other schools, people I've taught with at other schools. Thank you very much. You've given me the most immense joy in my life. To all the parents, thank you for coming for your children. And thank you for all the support you've given me over the years. To my family, to my friends, to my childhood friends, thank you for coming. I'd just especially like to thank everyone who's made this night possible. Finally, it is finally, it's been a long one, I'd like to ask every person in this room to embrace life with enthusiasm and passion. I've always had a passion for anything that I've done with life, and I'm going to continue to have a passion to tell you how much I'm loving every moment of my life at the moment. Whether I'm living out in nature, whatever I'm going to do with my life now, I actually think that I might go and grow organic vegetables. Needs helping me. But embrace it with passion. Thank you.